because I think actually mobile makes up a huge, is actually really important in the world of SaaS, but it's not really much talked about, so something I want to change. So that's why I'm here today, and that's what I'm going to do. So about 1.5 years ago, I worked about a 10-minute bike ride away from here at a company called Vuga, mostly known for publishing and developing casual free-to-play games, right? And in the last 2 years there, I was at the capacity of a product lead for a match-free game called Jelly Splash. And when you work in match-free gaming, when you work in casual game development, or in general, actually for most mobile applications out there, you're operating in the B2C space, right? So a place where the whole adoption of your application is very user-driven, right? You have an idea, you have an application, you market it to a bunch of individual users, and then you kind of like see what happens, you optimize your application, obviously, but in the end, the dominating factor that will decide whether your product will prevail or not is retention. Monetization is important, yes, but retention is probably more important than monetization, right? And everything that's happening around your product is happening in a very enclosed system, right? It's happening on the Google Play Store, on the App Store, everything is happening on mobile. Whether it's an ad, whether it's a transaction, whether it's a rating, it's like a very enclosed, encapsulated space. Now, I don't work at Vuga anymore, and the one company I work for right now does not have a 10-minute bike ride office away from here, but we do have 25 offices in the rest of the world, and the 4,000 employees that work for these companies generate a revenue of roughly around 1.2 billion per year. And even though you probably don't know the company itself, which is called WalkMeIn, you do know some of the brands that we work on. So GoToMeeting, for example, or LastPass are some of the more well-known brands that we maintain and establish worldwide. And the SaaS space really is a really interesting space, right? It's like a huge business, 100 billion spent per year. Mobile roughly makes up 6 to 8% of that, but there's also huge growth potential because overall enterprise software is around 500 billion big. So that's quite large. And you can see that there's also potential just by looking at the growth rate, right? Obviously, that's an average across different SaaS industries. Will be very different for something like video conferencing versus password management, but overall, very nice growth rates. But it's also a completely different industry if you compare it to B2C, right? Because in B2B, what you actually have is you have a very small group of decision makers who you have to market to and who you have to convince to adopt your product, and then they will take the decision for the rest of the organization that they are responsible for, and those people then have to use the product. So you're kind of like, you're not really optimizing for retention right from the beginning, you optimize for telling a story first, and then at some point later, you have to follow up on the promises that you've made, right? So that's really a different approach to the whole thing. So optimizing for retention comes a bit later. Obviously, if you have a terrible product, that's not going to work out for a very long time, but this is sort of like the initial path here. So what are some of the things that you can do with your mobile app to help you actually increase your close rate when talking to these decision makers, right? And that's what I want to talk about in the next 10 or so minutes. And I want to start with a very basic thing, number one, and that is know your mobile app strategy. Sounds super simple, but I don't think that's very clear to some of the companies out there. And I want to do that by going through 3 different categories of mobile app SaaS strategies that at least I'm aware of. Maybe you know more. If so, please tell me so afterwards. But these are the 3 that I know. So, number 1, mobile only, mobile first, which basically means that the whole functionality of your application is within a mobile app, right? Either because you want to have it as a mobile app only, or because you want to start with the mobile app first. And the only application that I know that is actually really doing a good job at that is Grasshopper Connect, which is mostly used in the US for small, medium-sized businesses, sort of like a communication app if you're a carpenter and want to kind of like channel all your communication into one application. And then maybe you can count in iSettle, Square, SumUp, all these payment providers. You could do that. But it's a very rare strategy, actually, overall, which was very surprising to me when I first started to look into it. The second category is the companion app. So that's sort of like where you have an extension of your desktop or web offering, and you provide some additional functionality that is only available in the mobile app, right? And or the other approach would be that you build sort of like a lightweight version of your offering. GoToWebinar is doing that by having a mobile app that only has the attendee perspective, but does not add any value whatsoever for the organizers. And Microsoft just released an application that is also a lightweight version of their Office suite, which has, like, I think it's called Microsoft One, and it has Excel, Word, PowerPoint, OneNote, all in one application. So not all the functionality of these products, but just a lightweight version of it. And then the third one, and that's the most common one, is make the mobile app part of your family, where you kind of like mirror the whole functionality of the web and desktop offering also in the mobile app, plus you add some mobile-specific functionalities. Like, for example, in the case of GoToMeeting, what we do is we have a commuter mode feature where people can use GoToMeeting in a low-data kind of way. So that's the most common approach. That's the one that most people and most companies actually use. So, and each of these has like their own quirks, cons, and benefits. Like if you're mobile only, then you're very dependent on the App Store, of course. If you have a companion app, then it's very hard to market it because there's not really a ROI that you can get back. So you have to use more like cross-linking solutions. Or if you're part of the family, then you can actually turn the mobile application into a new SKU and also turn it into an acquisition channel that lives next to web and desktop. But whatever you do, whatever your strategy is, right, you need to have a freemium foundation. Like, that may sound super, not as a big surprise to mobile game developers, but yeah, I think in the world of SaaS, it still is not super clear to some. Because without a freemium strategy, your paid acquisition campaigns won't be effective, right? And that's a no-brainer. Like if you get 100 people download your app, and then if you're good, then maybe you have like a 1% pay conversion. That means 99 of these people that you get to download the application, they will not add any benefit. If you have a freemium strategy, then still most people will not convert. Still, there will only be a very small amount of people who will actually pay. But then at least you maintain a long-term relationship with these freemium users in the long run and maybe convert them at some point in the future, right? I think that's well known, right? But there's another aspect to this that is relevant for SaaS. If you think, and you can do it in different ways, right? You can have like actual free tier. This is what LastPass is doing quite successfully on a personal level. And then GoToMeeting is using a different approach. Here we do actually more like a trial version kind of thing. And then after 14 days, we downgrade you to a very, very basic version of it. But there's another aspect to it. If you think back to this chart, what if you were actually running very targeted campaigns at one organization with your free tier to sort of like infiltrate it? And then when you get into this whole sales pitch conversation and you start talking about how can you actually get to like a really good close rate, you already have a critical mass of freemium users available in that organization who like and use your product, right? That definitely improves the likelihood of the adoption of the product and the likelihood of a good closed deal, right? So that's also where freemium can play a big role. And in general, I talked about decision makers, but who are they really? That's also something that you need to figure out. And I think that's something you need to figure out very early on. It will vary massively on the type of industry you're in and the type of business that you deal with. So for small, medium-sized companies, startups, it usually will be like the CEO, COO, CIO, CTO, CPO, you name it, something with a C in the beginning or a VP. If you get to like a larger organization, then it's more likely it will be something like the IT admin or the head of marketing, the head of sales, the head of CRM, right? So understanding who these people are is critical for getting to good conversion rates, right? In the case of GoToMeeting, that, for example, is more like the IT admin type of person. So we have to really make sure that we have a really good understanding of who IT admins are, what are their pains, where are they suffering the most, how can we help them, and then kind of like come up with good creatives that actually are appealing to them, right? Appealing to that very specific audience. And that does not necessarily mean that when we run a performance targeting campaign for IT admins that we look to create installs, right? It's also about thinking about, hey, maybe it's a dinner invitation, maybe it's like a webinar, maybe it's like a survey, maybe it's free concert tickets, right? There's lots of things that you can try to get the attention of these very important decision makers, right? In general, performance marketing, I think, is okay understood in the world of SaaS. It depends really on the type of company. Newer companies, Monday.com, for example, like did a splendid job, particularly on YouTube, with creating massive awareness for their product. So kudos to them. But in general, if you look at SaaS, it looks like this, right? That's advertising. Like so, out-of-home advertising, usually at airports, where business people walk around, go from one meeting to the next one, right? So that's very common, and it works, right? So it definitely works. But mobile can actually play a crucial role in really refreshing the view that SaaS companies have on performance marketing. And that's something that we found out in some experience that we ran earlier this year from the last 2 months, where we used the GoToMeeting mobile app as a new acquisition channel. So we built an onboarding funnel, we built a conversion funnel on Google Play and on iOS, on the App Store, and then ran very specific mobile ad campaigns. And turns out those were 5 times cheaper than what we had when acquiring customers on traditional channels like the web, right? So that's something not to underestimate. And it works particularly well if you look at a segment like SMB's low mid-market. Won't work that well in enterprise, right? That's a completely different conversation that you have. But for these smaller companies, up to 99 people, up to 99 employees, it can work really, really well. Okay, my last and 5th point should be also a no-brainer, but again, a lot of companies get it wrong, and that's thinking about the joint flow experience. And again, I'm going to use the GoToMeeting example, where most people will actually join a meeting from a URL, from a calendar invite, from an email, right? That's where they will get into the GoToMeeting experience. And every company, every product has like their own kind of like join flow, how do you actually get into a product. And thinking about how to optimize that is definitely worth the effort, because in the case of GoToMeeting, 75% of our installs, fresh new installs and also reinstalls, actually comes from web referrals. So people who used one of these GoToMeeting URLs, then ended up in the mobile web, and then we were trying to very quickly get them to download the application and push them into the mobile app experience, because that's the space you can much better control than the mobile web experience. So joint flow optimization, definitely worth a couple of minutes to think about. Okay, very quickly in summary, know what kind of app strategy you're actually trying to run for your product. Is it a companion app? Is it a mobile-only product? Is it kind of like part of the overall family? Then have a freemium strategy in place, maybe one that is appealing to actual personal users, so individual users, but to enterprise businesses as well. Identify the decision makers that actually make the buy decision at the end, and then run targeted ad campaigns to these users with offerings that are appealing to them, right? So what are the pains? What can you solve for them? Try out to establish mobile as an additional acquisition channel next to web and desktop advertising. And then think about how you can actually optimize the joint flow experience so people don't end up in the mobile web, but in your app. And that is it. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Have a great day.